I think you should.
All right, we take up our next agenda item. David Jefferson, presentation. Who's going to take that on?
Maybe just for Barrett's going to make a presentation, if he could maybe come up here, everyone can hear you. How close to that? That's pretty good. My name is Mark Baird. I'm here from Siskiyou County. I'd like to thank everybody for coming and thank you for the opportunity to speak and make a presentation on behalf of the state of Jefferson. I'll tell you a little bit about myself first. I'm a Reserve Deputy Sheriff in Siskiyou County. I'm a recently retired 747 captain for an international military airline. I'm a veteran of the Vietnam War, and I've been to 6 other wars as a military contractor for the United States government. What we propose to do here is the first Article 4, Section 3 state split in 150 years. We want to create a constitutional republic that protects the rights of property and protects the individual and protects our right to encourage business involvement and protects you as the governing entity of Lassen County so that you have the lion's share of the power and you can create a government with local talent and local wisdom where local decisions are made. You are the representatives of Lassen County, not the state, not people who live 900 miles away. You know best what needs to happen here. And that's the type of state we propose. I'd like to give you a little bit of background. First of all, King Solomon said there's nothing new under the sun, and he's right. History does repeat itself. It repeats itself over and over and over and over again. And in fact, when the Magna Carta was signed, King John limited access to the forest of England in order to, quote, preserve the resources. There's nothing that's being done by the state of California today that hasn't been tried by governments all over the world for the last 2,000 years. Thomas Gordon said in 1621 in Cato's letters, every plowman knows the difference between good government and bad. He knows the way is open to common sense. He knows because he knows how much of his own produce he gets to keep. William Penn said, I believe it was 1698, he said that he feared that Parliament was filled with fools because they're constantly making laws that don't have any relevance in our lives. They don't have impact on the lives of the local people. In fact, the people in England in 1698, or 1698, I'm sorry, they discovered an evil and pernicious design in their government. And that constituted some factors that were happening in England. One of which was the diminishment of property rights. Second one was creating fiat money that had less and less value. Government intrusion into the affairs of the church. The government is armed while the citizens are disarmed. Things like that. And so people left England and they came to the United States. It wasn't the United States then. They formed the 13 colonies. Now mind you, the colonies was not a land that had a government waiting for people to come and be governed. It was a land that was empty except for Native Americans. And people came to those colonies and then they realized that they needed government. They needed government to act as their voice in areas where they couldn't act for themselves. They delegated certain powers to government so that they wouldn't have to worry about those things in a day-to-day fashion. They delegated powers of government to deal with foreigners, to deal with foreign treaties, to deal with commerce between colonies, things like that. When the King of England violated the English Charter of Rights in 1698 and began a series of despotic actions that led to the Revolutionary War, the people of the colonies declared themselves free and independent from the government of England, and they formed a union. And the reason they formed that union was for one very important purpose: to preserve their liberty, to preserve their rights to property. Now, by liberty, and a famous constitutional scholar once said, if you can't define liberty, how can you defend it? And if you can't define tyranny, how can you defeat it? And this is very important, the concept of liberty. Liberty is what John Locke referred to as the natural rights. Marcus Cicero, a Roman citizen, said, a Roman senator said, that not all rights are written down. Not all laws are written down. Some laws exist only in the hearts of men. Those are the natural laws. They're not laws that we learn about from one another. They're laws that we derive from nature itself. and what John Locke called from nature and nature's God. Those are the inalienable rights. Those are the rights upon which we base our day-to-day lives. In other words, Constitution defines the limits and powers of the government that it creates. It's a contract, if you will. It was a contract formed by the people and by the states, and the product of that contract was the federal government. The Constitution of California is a contract that was written by the people of California for a certain purpose. Now, the court has a couple of interesting concepts. One of those is called the meeting of the minds. Whenever someone misinterprets a contract or acts outside the scope of a contract, the parties go to court, and the court will usually tell them to have a meeting of the minds. The meeting of the minds refers to the concept where you go back to the original documents, the notes, you get the people in the room who signed the document and created it, and you find out what they meant when they wrote it and what they wanted to see happen. And based upon those notes and those findings, the court makes a ruling on the behavior in question in the contract. In the question of the California Constitution, we have the meeting of the minds. In fact, in the federal Constitution, we have the notes, we have the letters, we have the speeches. Courts also have another principle, a rule of evidence, and it's called the best evidence. The best evidence is considered the original document. What was said first? Not reinterpretations of it, not books written by people who read the document, but the documents themselves. Well, in California, we're lucky. We can go to the meeting of the minds. It's the preamble to the California Constitution. We, the people of the state of California, grateful to Almighty God for our freedom, in order to secure and perpetuate it, we formed this Constitution. So we formed a Constitution in the state of California to secure our liberty, essentially. And that's what's wrong here. Now, the state of California is ungovernable. It's ungovernable. It's too big. We're typically governed by people who have no empathy for how we live our lives. That was noticed first in 1850 by President Polk. He said the state of California is just too expletive deleted big. It can't be governed. He wanted to break it in half in 1850. Now, in 1850, because of the Missouri Compromise, that was probably not that great an idea, because the hope was that Southern California would become a slave state. And in fact, Southern California had the only Army unit that seceded from the Union and went south, the Los Angeles Rifles. Now, Alejandro Pico in 1861, he passed an Assembly bill and a State Senate bill and was in front of the United States Senate to split California north of the Tehachapi Mountains. The reason that Alejandro Pico gave was that the affluent north was taxing the agrarian south to death. And so he decided that, and the people of California agreed with him, that California was not governable because it was so large, the representation was poor for all of the factions involved. Now, once again, it doesn't matter what you want. It doesn't matter what party you are. Here in the North State, you're irrelevant. We are irrelevant. Our votes are irrelevant. We have 6 state-level legislators for the northern third of California. The lower 2/3 has 114. It doesn't matter what you want. It doesn't matter how badly you want it. It doesn't matter what you vote for. You don't have a hope of getting it unless Southern California wants it too. And we can see where that's gone over the years. One of the mistakes we'd like to avoid with the state of Jefferson, the California Constitution has been amended 521 times in the last 164 years. That's a lot. And what is happening is, as Judge Posner in the Seventh Circuit said, evil can enter the political and the legal system when jurists and legislators embrace the cause of the day to the exclusion of the rights of the people and the law. And what happens in California is the cause du jour, the cause of the day, becomes that thing over which the legislators panic. New laws come out and you pay, and you pay, and you pay, and you pay. The latest of which is the chicken law. My wife said that she just went to the store and she paid $5.40 for a dozen eggs. They're about $2.95 2 months ago. That's because of the chicken law. Now, who pays that? Who's affected by that most? The legislators in Sacramento or the legislator in Los Angeles that authored that law? Or people on a fixed income and people on moderate incomes who have to go down to the store and buy eggs twice a week to feed their children? Senior citizens on fixed incomes. Eggs are a cheap source of protein. And I want to be humane as the next guy. I'm also a rancher in Siskiyou County. We run just under 1,000 acres. And I believe in chickens having as good a life as anybody else, but I'm not going to do that at the expense of my neighbors. That's ridiculous. A chicken's life is not as important as a human's life. That's just one of the mistakes California's made. Another one is hard. We have the cleanest air in the world here. In fact, I was walking in the door, and I took a deep breath, and you guys had a lot of blowdowns here in the last couple of weeks I saw on the way up, but this is the cleanest air in the world. So why is it that you're being forced to pay more gasoline taxes because the air in Los Angeles is dirty? How can that be? Now, the price of oil is down, so the people who are buying the gas didn't notice the increase, but it's about 17 cents a gallon. And Darrell Steinberg, the termed out Senate Pro Tem from last year, he figures it might go up as much as $2 a gallon in gasoline taxes. We pay the highest fuel taxes in the nation, and what do those taxes go for? Not to the roads. They're going to fund high-speed rail. They're going to fund urban mass transportation schemes. They're not going to fix the roads in the state of California. CARB is another one. CARB has killed so many jobs in the North State, it's ridiculous. Why is that? Because a scientist that worked for University of California faked a study where they used underage children and squirted 60 times the normal diesel particulate up their nose so that they could find some linkage to diesel particulate and disease. Was it a fraud? Absolutely. Did it stick? Yes, it did. So now we have CARB, and we're losing jobs all over the North State. These are just some of the reasons, and I could go on and on for hours and hours about that. And I think everybody in this room could go on for hours about how California is broken. It doesn't work for us. I was speaking to Brian Daly in Sacramento when we reported the last 3 counties that joined the state of Jefferson effort. And he said to the Fox News gal that was in there, he said, you know, one size fits all doesn't work here. One size fits all doesn't work in my district. It takes him 7 hours just to drive across his district. And that's simply indicative of our lack of representation. We have 1 state senator for every 1 million people in this state. If he did nothing but get 1 phone call per year from each person in his district, he'd have to answer the phone 4,000 times a day, roughly. State assembly person represents 500,000 people. We have 11 counties here that share 1 state senator. Los Angeles County alone has 11 state senators. So you can see that we're underrepresented. In fact, we don't have any representation at all. Once again, 6 state legislators for the northern third of this country. Now, the reason we have that situation is because in 1964, there was a Supreme Court opinion. The Supreme Court does not have the Article 3 power to make decisions. They can only create opinions. And so Chief Justice Earl Warren, who, by the way, Dwight Eisenhower called the worst damn fool mistake he ever made, issued an opinion, and it was called Reynolds versus Sims. Now, this is a basket of cases, literally, and it started in 1962 with Baker versus Carr. And in Baker versus Carr, the court gave itself the power to intrude into the state electoral process. Now, when I read Article 3 of the United States Constitution, and remember, constitutions bind governments, not people. When I read Article 3, I don't see anything in there that allows the Supreme Court to make decisions into state politics. The Supreme Court has the power over all matters of equity and law under the Constitution, not extra-constitutional. The Supreme Court does not have the power to change the Constitution. It has the power to rule on constitutionality. And what James Madison and Thomas Jefferson envisioned was that at that point, whatever was in question would go back to the legislature, who does have the power to change legislative models, and they would then reissue the legislation, and away we go again. But the Supreme Court gave itself the power to intrude in state elections. Then Earl Warren opined that that would be it. No one would ever challenge this again. No one would ever vote in a discriminatory manner because they'd be afraid the court would intervene. 30 court challenges later, Baker versus Carr came along. In Baker versus Carr, the Supreme Court opted to fix everything that was wrong, Gray versus Sanders. In Gray versus Sanders, the Supreme Court said, we're going to fix everything we did wrong in Baker versus Carr. So in Gray versus Sanders, they said, all votes in state elections will be 1 man, 1 vote. And that will put this in line with the federal Constitution. That's what Warren said. Now, oddly enough, the federal Constitution doesn't say that anywhere. And in fact, when you look at the Connecticut Compromise, the Constitution says just the opposite. Each state has 2 senators, no matter how small or how big, no matter how sparsely populated or how densely populated, because communities need representation. Diverse geographical areas need diverse representation. Siskiyou County is a forested county. We need different representation than a desert county like Mojave or Riverside County. But we don't have that because of Gray versus Sanders. Something like 30 court challenges later, Warren decided to put the final nail in the box, and he said that all state election processes will be conducted under an apportionment scheme supervised by the court. The dissenting justice in that case, his very dire opinion was, and it actually came true, that in doing this we would create a purely city point of view, and that electoral processes in the United States would be largely governed by densely populated urban areas at the expense of rural areas. And that's exactly what's happened, both in California and the nation at large. But what we have to do is address our own backyard. We're in no position to change the way the country works. We don't have near the clout. But what we can do is change how our government works. What we envision in the Article 4, Section 3 state process is a state where the counties have the lion's share of the power, where each county, no matter how small, has at least 1 state senator and at least 1 assembly person. And that way, you can guarantee that the county of Lassen will have representation no matter what it is you want to do. Now, how can we do that? If Reynolds versus Sims says all elections have to be done the same way, why do we think in Jefferson we can change that dynamic? Interestingly enough, the court went on to ignore itself twice after the Reynolds decision. The first one was Brown versus Thompson in Wyoming, where the court said Niobrara County, Wyoming only had 3,000 people in it. And there was a lawsuit because Niobrara had lost its state representative, so they sued. And they actually won. And the court said that every place, no matter how small it is, deserves some representation, provided it's not done prejudicially and it serves a greater state political good. And then the court went on to ignore itself again in Saylor versus Tulare Water. And that was a water district down south where some of the larger ranchers were pretty angry because they owned thousands of acres, and yet someone that only had 1 acre, because of 1 man, 1 vote, had equal say in water decisions. And so the court opined in that case that votes can represent rocks and trees, provided it's done to advance a greater state political purpose and it's not done prejudicially. So there you have the opening where we can create a state of Jefferson whereby each county will have at least 1 state senator, no matter how sparsely populated they are, and if I have anything to say about it, at least 1 assembly person. That gives every single county in Jefferson direct representation in both houses to accomplish the goals you need to accomplish, no matter what those goals are. Now notice I haven't mentioned political party once. I'm not a member of a political party. I don't care about political parties. I want what's right. I want what's right for myself, for my community, and for my neighbors. And those things are different in different issues. But without representation, it doesn't matter what I want. I called the chairman of the Democratic Central Committee in Siskiyou County because they're upset about this Jefferson deal. And I asked the lady, why you object to that? And she says, well, let me ask you a question first. I said, okay. And she said, how do you feel about single-use plastic bags? And I thought for a moment, I said, it sounds silly, but it's a fair question. And then I answered her truthfully. I said, it doesn't matter what I think, because I don't have the representation to make that into action no matter what I think. If I want the bags, I don't have representation. If I don't want the bags, I don't have representation. And that's just the bottom line for the counties. We've had 2 counties, Modoc and Glenn County, and they, one was email, one was phone call, send us one of those declarations because we're, under California's model of government, we're done here. The United States Forest Service, California Fish and Wildlife, River Keepers, Center for Biological Diversity, they are under the gun in so many ways because we lack a true constitutional republic that, quite frankly, the days of those counties' economic survival is numbered. You have a financial, I believe, did you get the financial statements for Jefferson, the models? We have now 4 counties. Last year when we started this, we had 3 counties that were in the red. Modoc County, about $4 or $5 million. Sierra County was $3, $4, $5 million. And then Trinity County, $35 million in the red. Now that's interesting because Trinity County sits in the highest value timber in California. Trinity County is a forest filled with Doug fir, the highest value timber in the state. I was a part of the multi-county hazmat response drill a couple months ago, and I was standing in the bottom of the Sacramento River in a car crash where toxics were spilled into the river, and we were going through the emergency response drill. And while I was down there, I saw 2 trains heading south with canned forest products on them. We're literally importing lumber from Canada. I talked to Jim Bailey, one of the largest employers in Trinity County, Bailey Lumber. They have 19 mills there. Because of the spotted owl regulations that are being managed by California Department of Fish and Wildlife, they now have 1 mill, and that mill gets its logs from British Columbia. And they're wondering why they're $35 million in the hole. If they simply logged to the Northwest Forest Plan, once again, I'm not anti-law, I'm not anti-government, I'm a deputy sheriff. I believe in the law, I believe in good government, I believe in basic common sense government. If they were allowed to log down to the level of the National Forest Harvest Plan that's already in place, already survived NEPA, already survived several court challenges, they would be profitable within a month because they have high value timber, they have too many trees, their trees are dying because of bugs. In Siskiyou County alone, because of the spotted owl regulations, we lost 250,000 acres of marketable timber this year. Fruit Grower Supply Company lost 50 years worth of growth. 50 years worth of growth because of the spotted owl. Oh, and by the way, it's been proven time and again that the spotted owl does better in second growth managed land than it does in old growth anyway. But now that they want to salvage log, the state of California wants to stop some of those salvage logging plans because, you know, the owls that are left alive after the fire might need those dead trees specifically. How do we win as people here? How do we win as local governments when we have representation of that quality? And I've spoken to Jim Nielsen and Brian Daly and Doug Lamalfa and Ted Gaines. I've spoken to all of them. And I asked them all, and I'm asking you today sincerely, if you have a better idea of how to restore representation so that my son can move back to California and get a job that pays more than $8 an hour, tell me what it is. We'll drop what we're doing and sign up immediately. The silence is deafening. There is no answer. This is the only plan to restore representation. Now, the Article 4, Section 3 process is kind of interesting. We're not breaking trail here. This has been done in this country 4 times. It's legal, it's moral, it's ethical. The Constitution of the United States says, and I'm paraphrasing, nor shall any state be formed from the territory of an existing state or to adjoining states unless the state legislature agrees and Congress agrees. We need our legal reading of it is we need 51% in the State House and we need 51% in Congress. And by the way, I've spoken to a couple of United States congressmen, and they say our arithmetic is very good for the next couple of years to make that vote happen. Our battle really is here in California. But people will ask, can it be done? It's too hard. I'm not a big time waster. I don't have time to waste. I wouldn't waste your time, and I wouldn't waste these good people's time if I didn't think this was possible. And so far, 6 counties agree that it is possible. They not only agree that it is possible, but that it should be done. So the Article 4, Section 3 process is very simple. We need a simple majority. Article 4, Section 3 does not mention the governor and does not mention the president. Our legal advisor says we don't need their signature. I went into the Capitol. I spoke to Darrell Steinberg. This was before the legislature changed hands in January. I spoke to his legislative advisor, the gal that told him what to think all the time. The first thing she said was, I'm an extremely progressive Democrat. And I went, okay, I don't care, that's irrelevant to me. Can I make my pitch? And I did. I spoke to her for about 30 minutes. I said pretty much exactly what I'm telling you. And at the end of that time, I expected to get kicked out of her office. And instead, she said to me, you make some extremely compelling arguments, and I am not opposed to what it is you're trying to do. She did some quick mental arithmetic, and she said, what you face is you need to change about 16 votes in the legislature, in the assembly, and about 11 votes in the Senate if you hope to achieve statehood. Gosh, I thought she was going to say like 100 or something. You know, so that's achievable. We can do that. And we're working toward that now. When we started this, the Sacramento Bee had a poll, a Pew Research poll, and only 28% of the people favored breaking up a state. After we submitted the last declarations, they had another poll in the Sacramento Bee, and in that one, 78% of the respondents favored state split. So the conversation is shifting our direction. Now, Article 4, Section 3, as I said before, it's been done 4 times in our history. The last time was Maine that broke away from Massachusetts in a genuine Article 4, Section 3 state split. And it took them 3 tries. Now, according to the Los Angeles Times, this has been attempted 128 times since California's inception. That's just about once per generation. Now, some people would say, well, that's proof it can't be done. I'm here to tell you that's proof that every single generation that grows up in California knows something needs to be done because California is fundamentally broken. In 1992, 27 of 31 counties voted overwhelmingly to depart from the state of California, Lassen County among them, in the 70% of the vote area. Dynamics have changed in the last 20 years, but I don't think for the better. And to give you an example of that, in 1960, from 1925 to 1964, California roughly had 1 senator per county. Now, our state constitution capped legislation in 1872. We were limited to 40 state senators and 80 assembly people. So, obviously, we have 58 counties. So some counties did have to share, but there were rules. There could be no more than 3 counties that had to share, and those counties had to be contiguous. So roughly, from 1925 until 1964, we did have an approximation of 1 state senator per county. And guess what? California worked then. If we could go back to that, California would work again. Because up until 1965, from like the 50s until 65, we had far less than $5 billion in long-term debt. After the Reynolds decision hit bottom, by 1987, our debt was 18% of GDP, and now it's in the 20%. We're facing $1.2 trillion worth of debt. The state now admits to $490 million in hard debt and about $800 million in unfunded liabilities. Now, obviously, as the state of Jefferson, the next question that everybody asks is, well, what about the money? Okay, the money is easy. If we separate from California now, and these aren't my numbers, this is Camilla Harris's opinion in the LAO report for the 6 States Initiative, that failed, but what we in Jefferson gained was an awful lot of free research out of that. Camilla Harris's opinion is that the state of Jefferson, on the one man, one vote principle, would be responsible for about 3% of the state's debt. That's around $500 million, $560, I think the paper says, I don't have it in front of me. And that's also enumerated in our debt repayment schedule. And after that, and after helping all of our communities establish profitability, we still have a budget surplus for the state of Jefferson. Yes, we do have now 4 counties in the red. We had 3 last year. Del Norte just joined them for 4. And now we have 4 counties in the red. But we have enough resource, we have enough material here that we can help those counties until they return to profitability. We have enough money to fund services. Your community is listed in there. I believe that the County of Lassen has a budget surplus at the end of the day under the Jefferson model of government. The reason you have that is because we don't need 571 state agencies in a small rural state. We need a part-time legislature, not a full-time legislature. We need a constitutional framework that puts the power where it belongs with these people here who elected you to speak for them. You know what they need. They put you in those chairs. You don't need someone 900 miles away telling you that you can't use a plastic bag. That's a decision for you to make, not them. I don't need a person who lives in Los Angeles to tell me that my $7,000 tractor needs a $20,000 exhaust filter. And guess what most of the 890 laws that passed through California did last year? They made the average person's life more difficult and more expensive. And they made the average guy a criminal. Because I'm not going to put the filter on that tractor. They can take me to jail and house me and feed me and clothe me and pay for my medical and give me cable TV instead. I am not going to retrofit that tractor. It's not worth the money to me. So now I'm a criminal under the California Air Resources Board regulatory scheme. And once again, the Constitution doesn't give an agency the power to legislate, and the Supreme Court has found that many, many times. The other objection that we have is, what about the feds? If we form our own state, the feds are still the feds, and most of the problems we have are from federal intrusion anyway. Yes, that is true. However, the 9th and 10th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States spells out how government is bound by their own contract. Now, once again, the Constitution is a contract. The federal